I'd like to welcome everyone and thank you for joining us for Rick Leiby's presentation on freight money. That term describes covers carried on a non-contract vessel for a private fee. And the post office became involved to increase their volume of business. And Rick is a former president of the Pennsylvania Postal History Society and former editor of our journal, The Historian, and obviously a very active member and prolific writer. And we're just happy to see his presentation tonight. So, Rick, if you'd like to share your screen.
Thank you, Steve. So, this evening I want to talk about freight money covers. And before I get started, I really want to say that freight money covers have been extensively studied and written about by Frank Staff and Charles Hahn and Richard Winter, and their research is the basis for this presentation. And all the credit for our phylogenetic knowledge is related to these covers is due to them. And then J.C. Arnell and James Pullen, they published the sailing dates and the information critical the interpretation of these covers. And lastly, John Barwis, who's a member of our society, has written extensively about Philadelphia foreign mails, including the sailing lines that were based in Philadelphia. So this presentation is not original research, but it brings together that knowledge and through these covers that originated from Philadelphia. And what I will say is all the errors and omissions in the presentation are solely attributable to me. So we can go from there. So the first question is, what is a freight money cover? It's a cover carried on a non-contract vessel from New York to England. Originally, it was carried on the Pioneer steamship lines, and then it also, a fee was imposed by the sailing ships. And it corresponded to the beginning of steamship service. It begins in about June of 1838, and it lasts until about July of 1848. And this is a private fee charged for the carriage. The term freight money is really a vernacular term, apparently from the times, and it was really brought to the fore by T. Stainer, who was the Canadian Deputy Postmaster General at Quebec, because he used that term to describe it in his December 38 notice. And some interpretations credit him with that. And why did the post office become involved in collecting a fee? It was very simple. It was to increase the volume of their business, even though they weren't getting the money. So what were the practices prior to the advent of freight money? You had essentially three choices. One, you could send a letter by private individual, and then they would place it in the mail or put it on to the ship's agent and send it on from there. And that's an example in the first one. It's kind of an interesting cover. Was originated in Philadelphia, was privately carried to the Leeward Islands and put on the Leeward Island packet and sent as a packet letter to England. You had private mail forwarders who made a business in taking the covers, arranging them to get them to the right ships at the right time, paying the fees, and doing those things. The second one is a good hue cover. And then the last option was to put it in the mail. And that's the third cover here. This cover was placed in the mail in Philadelphia, sent to New York. New York caught the thing, put it in the mail bag, put it on the Ontario, and sent it off to England that way. So prior to freight money, there was no postal treaties. So what had to happen was the cover had to be prepaid to the port where it was debarking the United States. The cover then was placed in the letter bag for the next packet to the destination. And the cover would be then sent postage due for the ocean carriage and any further inland postage that was needed to get it to its ultimate destination. As I said, the covers went to the ship one of three ways: via the post office, via foreign mail forwarder, or via private individual, and the covers were collected at the shipping agent and placed aboard the vessel. And then when the vessel arrived at port, they were required to deliver it to the post office immediately. So a couple more examples of that type of thing. The cover on the left is a cover that went through Hudson's in New York City. And the cover on the right is a cover that went through the Philadelphia mail system again. Some people will look at that cover on the right and say, Rick, it's 50 cents. That's a freight money cover from on a sailing ship. And unfortunately, it's not. And the reason we know it's not is this circular date stamp in London here is 1837. So we need to be very critical of the dates and when these happened. This is a quadruple rate cover. And the reason why is this. April 23rd, 1838 is the advent of steam ship crossing the Atlantic under the power of steam. There were some others prior to it. They had a steam engine on board, but essentially they traveled by sail. I think the best one operated 40 hours of the entire trip with the steam engine. But what we had was two companies in Great Britain. One that was building a ship, and they were ready to put everything together. And the interesting thing is that their engine manufacturer went bankrupt. And so what they did was, in order to keep on track and keep on time, they went out and they contracted for a small paddle wheel steam packet called a Sirius, which was usually moving mail from Ireland to Great Britain. And they sailed it out of Cork to England, to New York. At the same time, the second company was building a much larger vessel called the Great Western. And she was coming out of Bristol, and they were ready to advent their passage with the test run. And interestingly enough, they had a fire on board. Their chief engineer and principal engineer of the company fell and was severely injured, and they were delayed. So both of these ships were delayed significantly. But about 14 days prior to April 23rd, they left England and they arrived at the same in New York on the same day, April 23rd. The real excitement of this is that the transmission time for a letter that's going across the Atlantic is changing from about 35 days to about 14 days. And at the Economic Times, there were severe economic trials and tribulations. And so by cutting down by 11 days, you could make money or lose money based upon that knowledge and that circle of information. So there can't be anything from a freight money standpoint prior to April 23rd of 1838 because there wasn't steam transportation, and that's what caused it. And then after both ships were here, they turned and made their voyages back. The Sirius departed New York on May 1st, 1838, and the Great Western on May 7th. These covers were carried on those maiden return voyages. It's very interesting. The one on the left on the Sirius was admonished to travel by the Havre packet to Paris, France. And instead it was put on the Sirius and sent through London. And you can see that by the markings and the British rates on it. The rates that are on there from Philadelphia are 12.5 on the Sirius cover and 25 on the Great Western, which are simple single and double rates of the distance from Philadelphia to New York. There's no other rating added to it. And so at this point, even in May of 1838, there really is no freight money. Freight money has not been thought up yet. So what happens? Why is this created? And really, it's created for a revenue stream. When those two vessels sailed back to England, the newspapers estimated that there were 37,000 covers on board the two of them. So to have a cover from those maiden return voyages really shouldn't be a big deal. There were 37,000 to choose from. Now, I don't think many of them survived. But so after the Sirius left, the New York Albion newspaper did a little bit of math. And they said, hey, wait a minute. If you'd have charged a quarter for every letter you carried on there, and you would have only gotten half of the letters that you did carry, the revenue you would have gotten from carrying the mail would have exceeded the revenue from the passengers on the ship. And believe me, that did not fall on deaf ears with the Great Western. They were left too, but quickly in June, they put up a notice and said, we'll carry covers. It's 25 cents per sheet. And in proportion, up through four weights to go on it. And so the fee is created. And the fee is created by these pioneer steamships as a revenue stream for themselves. These are some notices that were up at the time. The broadside on the left was for the Liverpool, and it shows, if you look carefully here, single letter 25, double 50, triple 75, and quadruple $1. $1 per ounce for packets and letters. Newspapers were 2 cents, and so on. And then this one, which unfortunately is a little fuzzy on the upload, letters by packets, and this is a sailing vessel, the New Line of Liverpool. Letters by packets will be charged 12.5 cents per single sheet, 50 cents per ounce, and newspapers 1 cent each. So steamships charge 25, sailing ships charge half of that, 12.5 cents per sheet, respectively. And that began for the steamships in June, and for the sailing ships sometime in the fall of the year. That's the earliest advertisements that have been found related to that. So if we put that together, we need to have a table for Philadelphia. And that's because Philadelphia shows the rates in combination. They don't show them separately. Excuse me. So a single postage from Philadelphia to New York was 12.5 cents. If it went by steamboat, it was 25-cent freight money fee. And so that was a 37.5-cent charge. If it went by sailing vessel, it was 12.5, and 12.5 is 25, and on through. And then in 1845, after the change in the rates, it becomes 5 and 25 is 30, or 5 and 12.5 is 17.5, or double is 10 and 50 is 60, 10 and 25 is 35. Philadelphia doesn't make it easy because they put everything together in one table, one charge. So what we have here are some covers showing the varying rates. This is steam up until 45, 37.5, double is 75, $12.5, $50. A couple of larger ones, and that of 5 times, which is $1.87.5, and an 8 times at $3. And then at the end of 45 on, when the rates went to 5 cents, 30 cents and 60 cents for the single and the double. And the sale, 25, 50, 75, and $1. Interestingly enough, if you look closely at these covers, you'll see something else that Philadelphia did, and that is they had a tendency to mark the cover in pencil first. We believe that was done at the window, and then they were marked in ink when the markings were applied. Whether that was an accounting check or what it was, or the boss checking up, I don't know. But on many of these covers, you'll see that, and they are not two rates, they're the same rate. So what the freight money fee is it's a fee for service instituted by a private industry. It's not a postal rate or a postal charge. The revenue does not go to the post office department. And the reason that the businesses were willing to pay it was because it represented reduced transit time of getting information across the North Atlantic, much as we would pay an additional fee for overnight delivery. Interestingly enough, the British government said, nah, you're not going to do that. You're not going to put a charge on anything that comes from England. So it only occurs on eastbound sailings from New York to England, does not occur on westbound sailings from England to the United States. So given this information, since it's a private fee, it shouldn't be shown on the covers. Not related to the post office. Why are they accounting for it? Why are they including it to do that? And in fact, the interesting thing is there's almost no New York covers that show anything of a freight money fee. And the reason was because it was paid directly to the ship agent. And it's just generally not shown on the covers. So New York covers don't show it. So when you go to see where you can find good examples of what freight money was and how it was handled, Philadelphia is the biggest area for you to take a look at, followed by Baltimore. Most of the covers, and this cover was sent in the heyday of freight money, April of 1839. Again, there's no notation of freight money. This cover was sent from Philadelphia to DeForest and Company in New York to handle it. They were instructed to put it on the London packet on the 10th of March. They crossed all that out. They did so. It was a 25-cent fee for the cover, a double rate. That's confirmed. The English rate at 2 shillings and 8 pence is a double rate. And what happened was DeForest paid the 25 cents direct to the ship's agent. And so it's not recorded on any of the covers. So the majority of covers don't show it. Now there are some outliers, and there's always some anomalies and some fun stuff. The top cover is a really interesting cover in that it was originated in Philadelphia. It was originally stated to travel on the Susquehanna, which is a Cope Line ship leaving from Philadelphia. That was crossed out and it was changed to the steamer Sirius. So the cover was then taken, sent to New York, and sent to England via the Sirius. The dates match, and the GP is simply a penny post in Great Britain for delivery to the address on the cover. The interesting thing is that the freight money is recorded here, paid 25 FM. The cover below it is the same thing, only a double rate cover. This was carried privately to New York. It was given to the ship's agent. It was sent on the 3rd return sailing of the Great Western on August 16th. And again, it's been docketed, paid 50 cents FM. Now, you could probably give me an argument that maybe that's Frank Mandel's agent fee, but I don't think Frank works that cheap. So, but it's fascinating that, and people were accounting for this because this was a business expense. So now here's an interesting one that came from Richard Winter's collection. This is a cover that was sent from Philadelphia via Hales to New York. And on it, Hales in pencil wrote 25 to account for the fee paid to the ship's agent on the cover. These are the only three I've seen or found. I believe there may be a few others from the records, but they're hen's teeth to find, where people have recorded the freight money for a personal accounting basis. So what happens? Philadelphia goes out and they want to change this whole approach. And the fellow on the left there is James Page. He's the postmaster in Philadelphia. And the fellow on the right is Amos Kendall. He's the postmaster general. And Dick Winter did a wonderful set of research where he went into the postmaster general's letter books, and he was able to extract the correspondence related to this, and particularly to what happened in Philadelphia and what they were doing. So on August 1st of 38, James Page, who's a postmaster in Philadelphia, writes to Kendall, and probably at the urging of a businessman, and says, you know, we're missing the boat here. Oh, that's a terrible pun, but we should be collecting this fee and paying it just like they are in New York off the books, because then we'll get more letters that'll go from my post office through to New York, and we'll generate more revenue for the Postal Service. And on August 9th, Kendall agrees. He says, yeah, that's a pretty good idea. That's what we should do. So what we want to do this is we'll make a plan where the Philadelphia postmaster will act as a collection agent for a private fee. It's the first time and probably the only time that the government ever allowed that. And then they would pass the money on to the New York shipping offices. And initially they did it via the New York post office. And on the 13th of August, he sent them instructions to New York as to how they were to do it. And on the 14th, he sent instructions to Philadelphia to make up the steamship letters as a separate package, to have separate waybills for the inland and a separate waybill for the steamship postages, and how to do that. And then by the spring of 1839, he says, this is crazy. We're just putting work on New York. You just pay the money direct to the steamship agents. And so Philadelphia is authorized by the Postmaster General to do this. After Philadelphia, there were a couple of other cities that were also allowed to do this and collect a fee. And the interesting thing about this is when he wrote this up, his clerks or whoever was responsible for it, he required that the charges be shown and included so that they could be accounted, but he didn't issue specific instructions as to how to do it. And so as a result, everybody does it differently. Philadelphia rolls it all up in one fee. Some people put the inland charge on the front of the cover and the steamship charge on the back. Some people put it as two lines, depending on what post office was doing. But Philadelphia makes it a little challenging because they roll these all together, and that makes it hard. And also, an interesting aside, at this time, one of the Pioneer steamship lines went out and produced a broadside or a circular and sent it out to all the post offices they knew and said, this is how you can send freight money. And the Postmaster General had not authorized that for everybody to do. He was in a trial basis. So that caused a little bit of a ruckus along the way, but oh well. So, as we said before, the third return sailing of the Great Western occurred on August 16th. And these instructions to New York and Philadelphia were on the 13th and the 14th of August. So we don't believe that there was enough time for Philadelphia to get everything in place to collect the freight money fee for that sailing of the Great Western. And if we accept that, then the next sailing where the freight money fee could be collected by Philadelphia is October 4, 1838. And there are two covers that I know of existing that show that sailing and freight money fee. This is a double rate cover. 12.5 times 2 is 25. 25 times 2 is 50. Added together, 75. This is a double rate cover from Philadelphia that is what I believe to be the first opportunity for showing the Philadelphia Post Office collecting the steamship freight money fee. Dick Winter in his collection had a single rate cover. It went further on into Europe. It's really a spectacular cover. And those are the two that I know. So who were these companies that competed? And what about these companies, these pioneer steamship lines? Well, there were 6 of them. The British and American Steamship Company, which originally chartered the Sirius and then brought on 2 ships of their own. The Great Western, which had one for the longest time and finally brought on a running mate in 1845. The City of Dublin Steam Packet Company, which chartered the Royal William, and then their subsidiary built and operated the Liverpool. R.B. Forbes had a ship named the Massachusetts, which made 2 treks. Sands and Company, the Red Cross line, had the Sarah Sands, and the Blackball line had the United States. There were only 2 of these vessels in service longer than 2 years. Generally took about 7 weeks from an eastbound sailing to the next time they were ready to start an eastbound sailing. So you had 2 weeks, a week and a half, 2 weeks back, a week and a half to get ready, and you're ready to sail. And in fact, a lot of times they did not like to sail in the late December, early parts of January, February, because the storms and the icebergs were such that it caused problems. But if you look at this timeline of ships, it shows you this is a tough business. Once you got 3 ships, one of them's in service, one of them's going out of business, you know? And when you look at it along the way, only 2 of them really were in service for any significant period of time. And the ones that were in service for those times, they were parts of other businesses. The Great Western was part of a major railroad company in England. And so it was not dependent solely upon what was going on with these ships. Not the business I want to get into, I think. So going down through them one after the other, this is the British and American Steamship Company. We've looked at both of these covers prior. This is the first. On the left is the first return sailing of the Sirius, and the one on the right is the second return of the Sirius. But they also built their own ship called the British Queen, which made 9 round-trip voyages. And subsequently, it was sold to the Belgian government and completed another 3. The cover on the top right is a 5 times rate. It was on the second return sailing of the British Queen. And when you're looking at this, 6 shillings is, there's over $1.50, $1.60 in US money on the British side of delivering the mail, and $1.80 on the other side. This is a $3.50 cover. This is at a time when the average wage for a laborer was $1 an hour. These are very expensive covers. The cover to the left on the bottom is an interesting one because it arrived in a very small window in Great Britain, which is a 36-day period when the 4-penny post was operating. And the British Queen is the only only ship that arrived at that time. And so it was charged 1 shilling, which was 8 pence for the ship fee and 4 pence for the inland delivery, $12, which is a shilling. And then the final return sailing for the British and American Steamship Company is the last cover there, and that's a single rate cover that goes on from there. And then they brought on a third ship, and that ship was the President. And the President made 2 round-trip sailings. The cover on the left came on the maiden return voyage. The cover on the right, even though it is docketed to go on the Great Western didn't sail in November, and the only ship it could have sailed on was the President. On the third trek, the ship sunk. 136 people perished. The captain, Richard Roberts, was the captain of the Sirius when they first crossed the Atlantic. He was the toast of New York 3 years earlier. And the sinking caused the demise of the company. Interestingly enough, the theory is that's the first steamship to run into an iceberg. And that's the reason why it sank. So the second group company was the Great Western Steamship Company, and they made 45 return sailings from New York. So they have the predominance of the covers that you'll find from Philadelphia. This is an interesting one. I'm going to show some interesting different things about it. This interesting one here was sent to the Secretary of the Legation of the United States in Austria. And what they did was they put it in the mail in Philadelphia, went to New York, went on the Great Western, and it was directed to go to a forwarding agent in London. He received it, crossed the thing out, paid the fees, and forwarded on through Holland, Rotterdam, onto Austria. So an unusual cover in that it went beyond England. The next 2 covers are kind of interesting. They show a major difference, if you want. They both were charged the same rate in New York, $1.12.5. But the interesting thing is that the British rates changed. And the first one, sent on the 7th return sailing, ended up being charged 51 pence or $1.02. It's about 2 cents per pence in conversion in postal fees in Great Britain. However, a little over a year later, when it comes to Great Britain, their rates have changed such that they were charged 16 cents. So there was a difference of 86 cents in the cost to the recipient of these covers, just because the postal rates had changed in Great Britain. The US didn't change the postal rates until 1845, and when they did, you can see what happens. The rate goes down. A single rate is 30 and a double rate is 60 cents. And then the double rate is 1 shilling 4, 16 2/8. And on the single rate, it was also a shilling and 4, because it was the rate, the ocean rate, and then a rate to take it on further to Holland. But postal costs significantly going down by 1845. These 2 covers I truly smile about because they're not obvious. The first, the top one, is a Harnden's freight money cover. And Harnden's really didn't like to do things with the New York steamship companies. Harnden's business was to carry mail to Boston and put it on the British subsidized steamboats. But here in this case, it was sent to New York and went on the Great Western, as per the admonition of the sender. And a side is at the top, you see it was 37.5 crossed out and changed to 12.5. You say, why is that? Well, at this point in time, Harnden's was required to take their mail to the post office and have it stamped and have it rated at the post office. They took it to the post office and they rated it as a freight money cover. And my opinion is Harnden said, nope. That 25-cent fee is not a postal charge. You get 12.5 cents. The 25 cents, that's my business and how I handle that in New York. And the reason why? Because they were getting a 7.5% commission on bringing that mail there. So an interesting cover. The second cover at the bottom is really interesting. It's an outer wrapper sheet, and it was received in Philadelphia by a shipping merchant. And that shipping merchant did a tremendous amount of business in South America. And what he did was he received this letter. He then took it and put it in the US mail in Philadelphia and sent it as a freight money cover on to London. So quite an interesting cover in that it's got a history behind it that we really don't know anything about because it's just the outer wrapper of the cover. And I'll go back to something that we said in the beginning. People didn't have to do this. They could carry the mail privately to New York, pay the fee to the ship agent, and that's the end of it. And here's one in 1843, privately carried from Philadelphia to New York, given to the Great Western ship agent Abraham Bell, paid the 25 cents. When it gets to England, 8 pence charged. So 16 and 25, 41 cent charge for moving the mail. So if you had someone who went to New York, it was a great cost control. And people took advantage of that, which makes these covers harder to find. In case you were bored with blue covers, remember that in 1843 and 44, Philadelphia used red ink for their markings. And so you should find freight money covers with red markings. And the reason you don't find many is not that the red marking is unusual. It's that there aren't many freight money covers in that later period, 1843, 1844. So if you see red on a freight money cover, it's worth grabbing. The Great Western then went and finally in 1845 put a running mate up with the Great Western. Name of the running mate was the Great Britain. It was a huge ship, 3 times the size of the Cunard ships that were going there. It only made 4 voyages and when it ran aground. And that, because they could not get it off, ended up being the demise of the company. This is a single rate cover from 1846 that was carried on there. And if you'd like to see the Great Britain, if you go to Bristol, England, it's a museum in their harbor. The ship was floated, and it's a maritime museum. The next company was the City of Dublin Steam Packet Company. What that was the overarching company. They chartered a ship called the Royal William, which made 3 round trips. And then they built and owned a ship called the Liverpool, which is made 7 round trip voyages. All of those voyages essentially bankrupt the company. There was just incredible financial losses, and the company was disbanded in 1840. Cover on the left is interesting because if you note, Philadelphia struck in black. There was a 1-week period in 1839 when Philadelphia did not use blue ink, they used black. There are a couple of times that happens in the history. They were very infrequent and very unusual. But because of the timing of the sailing of the Royal William, freight money cover has black Philadelphia mark. And then the cover on the right is just amazing. That's a 2-ounce cover. That was a packet of covers. And so it's an 8 times rate. When you look at it, it's just unbelievably expensive for that time in that period. The Sands and Company was the Red Cross line. They had the Sarah Sands. That name may be familiar to some people because that vessel was very involved in Pacific Mail steamship operations. But it did make a couple of crossings for the Red Cross line between New York and Liverpool. And then it was sold and it went to San Francisco, and it traveled from San Francisco to Panama City. And then after that, it was in the Pacific Mail Steamship Company. And there's a lot of Sarah Sands covers, I think, from the Pacific Mail. One thing to say is I have not recorded a Philadelphia cover that traveled on the Massachusetts. And as far as the United States goes, there's a reference to a cover in a large lot from the Dick Winter sale, which you didn't see, and I don't know, but it would be very late for a Freight Money cover. But those are that's the only reference to the United States from Philadelphia as a Freight Money cover. So that handles the steamship lines. What happens with the sailing ship lines? In New York, there was, on the East Harbor, there was just row after row after row of sailing ship slips and where they went. And they adopted a charge also at 12.5 cents. And it happened in the fall. That's the earliest advertisements that we can find. The interesting thing is that it didn't apply to all the ships. The Havre line did not charge the fee. Cope line sailed out of Philadelphia didn't charge the fee. So it really was limited to New York. There were 6 packet companies. 4 went to Liverpool, 2 went to London. And essentially they were pushing to get the cycles of information from 5 to 6 to drive the steamship guys out of business. Most of them made their money through other things, whether it be immigrants in the potato famine or other freights. The first line was the Blackball line. It's the first line. The table at the top left shows the vessels that were in service during the Freight Money period. And here we have a 4 times rate on the left, a 3 times rate on the right. Interestingly enough, the one on the right is only marked in pencil. So the New York clerk didn't, or I'm sorry, the Philadelphia clerk didn't mark it in ink. The second line was the Red Star line. That's a line that was done by Robert Kermit. It was an interesting line and it was well known at the time. Here's a pair of covers that are very interesting. They were sent from Philadelphia on the same ship, on the same vessel, the United States. They originated in Philadelphia on June 12th, and they both went to Huth and Company in London. So there was plenty of mail that was carried on these ships and other things. It's amazing to find 2 covers exactly the same coming from different originations in business. The Blue Swallowtail line was the 4th line. And that really was formed when the Erie Canal brought goods to New York. And from there, they were really a freight company. They didn't have a lot of vessels, but they carried the mail. And here's 2 examples. One is a single rate cover from the Patrick Henry, and the other one is sailed from there the day after on the Patrick Henry. The interesting thing is Philadelphia used 2 different hand stamp markings 1 day apart, but that was common. They had 2 hand stamp markings in use from 1836 to 1841. This cover came out of Europe. It was found by someone and offered to me. It really isn't a cover that anybody would write home about. The Philadelphia markings faded. The rate is a single rate. It's no big deal. But when you look at it and you go online and you look at the arrival dates and the Lloyd's ship list, this was carried on the ship Rochester of the new line. And there aren't many covers of that. And the new line got absorbed into the Blue Swallowtail line quite quickly after about 3 years. And then the dramatic line, which was E.K. Collins, and people claimed that it really was about the owner, about being dramatic, not about the name of the vessel. This cover sailed on the Rosius. And interestingly enough, Collins sold the line and went and started a steam packet line to carry mail from the U.S. to Liverpool in competition with the Cunard line, and he went bankrupt in '58, and the sailing ship line lasted until 1870. And then this cover is kind of fascinating because it was sent from Philadelphia. Oh, sorry. It arrived in New York, and it arrived after the mail bag for the Siddons had closed. And so as a result, New York marked it with their marking with the phrase "too late," and they put it on what appears to be the New York of the Blackball line and sent it there based upon the receiving date in London. And lastly, I always find something that doesn't make a lot of sense. This cover here is a 50-cent cover from Philadelphia in September of 1838. It's a sailing ship cover. So it's a choice. It's either a double rate freight money cover or a quadruple rate no freight money cover. Interestingly enough, England rates it as a double rate cover. And so the potential exists that this is a September cover of 1838 where the Philadelphia Post Office collected the freight money fee for a sailing ship, which means they collected the freight money fee for the sailing ships before they did for the steamships. It's a stretch. It's a stretch. But interesting, Dick Winter had one also that he couldn't ever come to terms with, and it was again the same time period and the same line, the Blue Swallowtail. And the question is, I think this was a business thing. Did they throw the rate up and see if it stuck? See if people would pay it? And so there aren't any advertisements about it, but they charged the rate to see if they could get away with it. Interesting cover. Don't know that it is, can't prove it is or isn't. So what caused freight money to stop? What caused the demise of it? And really, it's right here, the British and North American Royal Mail. If you look at freight money covers and a census of them, I have about 160 from Philadelphia that I've recorded. And if you plot those by transport type and by year, you see that the freight money covers are 39, 40, 41, and by 42, they're gone. There aren't many examples. Now, that's a very small sampling, and statistically, I'm not going to be able to defend that. But it certainly is interesting in saying that by 41 to 42, freight money is not the way that things are going, and there has to be a substitution. So what's the substitution? What caused the change? Well, if you look at the rates, prior to freight money, it was about 50 cents to send a letter from Philadelphia to New York to Liverpool to London, total cost. When freight money comes in, it's about 75 cents. When the British begin to lower their rates, it gets as low as 53 cents. And when the US lowered their rates, it gets down to 46 cents for steamship. But if you look at the Cunard charges, where it was subsidized by the British government, it was 42 cents, and then it went to 34 cents. So from a business standpoint, This was an expensive way to send mail, particularly when things were changing in the late 1840s and transportation between Philadelphia and Boston was tremendously different. So when you look at it, there was somebody who helped. And the one that helped was Harnden's. Harnden's made a business of carrying mail from Philadelphia office to Boston to put it on those steamers, on the Cunard steamers. And so you can find all across this period, 41, 42, tremendous number of examples of them getting material to every one of those ship sailings. And if I can, I want to go back. In 1841, the Cunard had 22 sailings. In 1842, it had 20 sailings. The Pioneer steamships in 41 had 6, and then 42 had 8. So they weren't reliable. They didn't have the system. And then the last cover in the bottom right-hand corner is one of my favorites. It's we don't need no stinking Harnden's. Whoever sent this originally said to send it by Harnden's to Boston, and then they crossed it out and just put it in the Philadelphia Post Office. Send it by the Philadelphia Post Office. And to show how easy that gets, this cover in 1845 was sent by someone staying at the United States Hotel in Philadelphia. He got up, he went down to the front desk, or I assume he went down to the front desk, paid 18 and a half cents, and had the hotel. They marked it, they put it in the box, they had it picked up, delivered to the Philadelphia Post Office. It was sent to Boston. It went on the Cunard steamer, and it's in Glasgow, Scotland. And all he had to do was go from his room to the front desk. The ability to send mail like this really changed by 1845. And so that was the end of freight money. No one was going to pay the fees. And it was an interesting blip along the way. It quickly died. And interestingly enough, Cunard continued to carry mail, and the U.S. Steamships struggled to make money against it. So if you want to, I put a list of some things if you want to read a little bit about freight money, some of the things that have gone along in that, just because I feel it's important. Like I said, it's not my research. It's tying together what other people have done. And so I'm open for questions.
I have a question.
Sure.
I was under the impression when you were talking that because the freight money covers went on steamships that were faster, people paid that rate. Then you started talking about freight money covers going on sailing ships. And that's when I started thinking, well, wait a minute now, was this some sort of scheme? What's going on here?
It's a business scheme. It's a business scheme. If you don't want to pay the full ferriage to put it on a steamship, what's your options? And the option is it goes by sailing ship, and all the sailing ships in New York were charging 12 and a half cents. Yep. And you didn't have an option if you wanted to go to New York. Your truly only option was to go to Boston and put it on Cunard from 42 on. Now you could go to the Cope line in Philadelphia. Their sailings are listed. John Barwitz put those up in an article in the Philatelic Classic Society, the Chronicle. But their sailings weren't as frequent. And in this time period, there was a lot of economic upheaval. there were panics, there were recessions, there were all sorts of things. And so a 2-week window on the price of something really could be converted to a lot of money. And it's interesting to read some of these letters because the numbers in the letters are amazing. They're $50,000 in value in a shipment. And so this was completely different than today's world of we know what the price is because it's published on the internet for everybody immediately upon change. And it's a hard thing to get your head around. I traded lead for a while, and if you deal in lead, there's a cash price, but the real trade in lead is in 3 months, and that 3-month price is based upon this. It took 3 months to get the bills of lading and change to letters of credit, change to financing, and then finally paid off. And the British have not done away with that. Yeah.
Hey, Rick, I had a question too. What would be the proportion of business letters to like personal correspondence? Was there? I mean, these were obviously very expensive.
Yeah,
so
but they're almost solely business letters. Very few personal, except in the first shipment, the first return voyages. There's some of that, but the other thing about it is, of course, that the surviving correspondences came from the large London trading and banking houses, and so the individual cover that went to Steve's relative in Glasgow, 6 generations ago, didn't get saved, but the Huth and Company in London, when they wanted to cash in on what the paper was worth in the 1940s, there was a huge amount of coverage to go through. Kind of the same thing with Nathan Trotter and Philadelphia Stampless. There's a tremendous number of Trotter covers. Eli Beatty, who you like.
Yeah.
These are all business correspondences. They really have preserved this and how we know it.
So was there anywhere where people were keeping track of these letters? One of the things we talked with the people from the American Philosophical Society, they have Ben Franklin's letters when he was postmaster. And that's very interesting too, trying to connect a journal of what was sent and where it was sent. Is there anything like that kind of helps to document some stuff?
No, not really. And one of the things that I didn't bring up was one of the other things that you were subject to was transportation failure. Ship would sink. Ship would get stranded. So a lot of mail was done in duplicate and triplicate, so that and they were marked as such, so that the information went on 3 different lines with the hope that one of them makes it.
I think we're getting to be like that today.
Yeah, it's all gone full circle, hasn't it?
Yep.
And then another interesting thing, you mentioned James Page as the Philadelphia postmaster,
Yes.
who instituted the way rates were handled in Philadelphia. James Page has another distinction. I believe he became postmaster in 1834 and introduced the double line octagonal cancels that were used at Philadelphia from 1834 to 1836.
Yep.
So he apparently was a pretty bright and enterprising guy in figuring out the best way to handle things.
I will say at that time, the postmasters, particularly the postmasters of the big cities, they were entrepreneurs. They were, their wage was set, but depending upon the volumes that they were able to get through, they could negotiate some more things. So they were trying to make money. It's really, you're right, Norm. He was an interesting character. The only place I got the picture of him, interestingly enough, was from the Masonic Lodge in Philadelphia. That's the only painting of Page that I was able to ever come across. That's why he's wearing a Masonic collar in that picture. But he was a very interesting individual. Really neat. In one of the things you can read with regards to Harnden in there, if you go to the reports of the Postmaster General, and I'm not quite sure what the years are, but there's in the report of the Postmaster General, he includes letters received from the Postmaster in New York and the Postmaster in Philadelphia, and they are both saying Harnden's is the worst thing in the world. They are going to put us out of business. They are killing us. They are doing everything to steal business from us. And then he puts in a letter from the Postmaster in Boston who says, Harnden's is the greatest thing since sliced bread because he's bringing all this mail to my office and I'm making money on it. So yeah, they were typically entrepreneurs at that time.
Awesome. Okay, does anybody have any other questions or comments? Okay, well, I'd really like to thank Rick. This was fascinating. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. And as I said, it'll be recorded and, I'll have it available on our Facebook, YouTube, all the different places. It'll be out there if you want to let anybody know that wasn't able to make it tonight. It's very fascinating.
Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Okay. Robert, if you want to stay, I'll work with you on that background if you want to try it. Everyone else,
if you don't mind.
No, not at all. No. Everyone else, thanks and have a great evening. And
Appreciate it.
Yep.
Thank you, Richard. Good job.
Bye, y'all. Thank you.
Okay. So if you want to try and put that up there, we can try and flip it again and see what happens.
Yeah, it's funny because it looks normal on my end. Let me see. So I bring it up. I choose the virtual background. I'm picking that one.
Right. Oh, it's correct now.
Okay, for me, it's not correct.
Yeah, see. So maybe that's what it looks like, when you're looking at it, but it is facing, I can read
Okay,
2, 4,
so
6.
I'm thinking that if I go, I've been doing a lot of Zoom stuff. And I see people with material in the background, and I'm thinking, okay, that's kind of cool. I want to try that.
Sure.
And but
Well,
how about
that looks
you?
pretty neat.
Does yours look normal when you look at?
To me, it looks like if I'm straight on, it's the cancellation is in the top right for me.
Okay.
Maybe for you it shows differently. I'm not sure.
Well, for me, the cancel is right above your head.
Okay.
Is that where it's showing for you?
Yes.
Okay.
And so that's one of the things to consider too if you're picking out different things. Charlie Tacoma did one, and we had a writers roundtable for the Mid-Atlantic Federation, and he had, I forget exactly which one it was, but he had it Washington's head, but he turned his head so that it looked like he was actually in the stamp image.
It kind of bleeds into it.
It was kind of neat.
I've seen that.
But sometimes, I kind of try to look for covers where there's not a lot, like where I would be, and the stuff is around me.
I know.
So it might be worth playing with a couple.
I need to try something that's a little lighter.
Yeah. Well, that's really cool. I don't know. Are those the carmine color? I'm not really like a 2-cent guy, but
actually these are the carmine
awesome
color, but they have it's a combination block with a cap on both 2s.
Oh.
Cap on 1 2.
I see.
I don't know if you're familiar with the caps.
Yeah, I've heard of them. I haven't gotten in. I mean, I have as much of a U.S. collection as I can afford, so I'm in pretty good shape, but I haven't gotten into real detail. I'm not like a Washington Franklin guy, trying to get every one of those. I just get it. And quite honestly, I have pretty much moved on to postal history. I
That's
just
what I
find
did.
it fascinating, and I wish, it's good primer, collecting stamps is a good primer,
Yeah.
but postal history for $10, you could be, interested for 2 weeks in a cover,
Oh, yeah.
researching it and everything else. And with stamps, I started thinking, it's like, well, so you have, how well centered is the front? How good is the
About the gum.
gum?
Is the gum
What's the
okay?
cancellation? Yeah, and this whole gum thing, it's making me crazy. I don't want to. And the stuff on the front, all this the graded stuff, is it an 80 or is it an
I know.
85? And it's worth twice as much if it's a 90. Stop. It's not for me. I'm not
I
trying to
actually
say it
collect
shouldn't be
this
for anyone
stamp
else.
on cover, used.
Oh, okay,
I
cool.
have, I have, I have an exhibit on it, but it's an old exhibit, but I have lots of these things. I
Oh,
actually
cool.
got some from LeBron Harris. I mean, he was
Oh,
selling some of his stuff. I got some of it from him.
oh, neat. So how did you
Anyway,
hear about this presentation, Rick's presentation?
say what now?
How did you hear about Rick's presentation tonight? Was that from an
Oh, I
email or?
joined the Lancaster
Oh,
club.
okay.
I'm in Maryland, but and so I get their stuff. So I went into one of your one other meeting, and
Okay.
so this is my second meeting.
Awesome. So we're starting this Mid-Atlantic Federation. And so, Pennsylvania is very strong, New York, New Jersey, of course. Virginia is strong also. There used to be a Maryland Postal History Society, but I guess there's no more.
Hmm.
So we've actually gotten Labron. He attends all our meetings, and he's actually going to be part of a workshop that we're doing. I'll make sure you're on that mailing list
Yeah.
for the 29th, I think, is the next one.
Yeah, I
That
think you're going to
second
do
part of
something
our
on
writer.
self-publishing books or something.
Right. Yeah. Well, so it's a second part of a writers round. I call them roundtables. I don't know. It sounds good. But we had a research roundtable. Then we're doing writers roundtable. After that, I'm going to do a technology roundtable. And then we also have a restoration roundtable set up. It's where Charlie DeComo, he's really good at like all the different chemicals and what you can do to, like, he works on a lot of revenues and things, and he can get stains out and all
Oh
kind
yeah,
of
I
cool.
love that stuff.
Yeah,
I
people.
just want to make
So
them look pretty.
yeah, and the technology stuff, with the Mid-Atlantic Federation, it's a little different. We're focused on Pennsylvania, and kind of trying to stay in that lane. Where with the Mid-Atlantic, we have a wider range of topics that we can do that are of interest to people. And the technology part, we want to try and support clubs that are out there that may not know how to do Zoom or how to set up a newsletter or a website. All that technology gets overwhelming when you're trying to get volunteers to do stuff.
Yeah.
So we just want to put some. Martin Miller is the editor of our journal in the Pennsylvania Society, and obviously I'd love to invite you to join that too. I don't know how many. I'm a member of probably 25 societies. Some I just do just for the journals and the different things because it's fascinating to me. But I think our journal is well worth it. I mean, you can take a look at our website also. It's PaPHS.org.
I
I,
may have
I, I do the
something for
website.
your journal someday.
Oh, that would be excellent.
If it's considered okay. I mean,
Sure.
I actually just published a book a year and a half ago on the Lippman postal card,
Okay.
which is from Philadelphia.
Oh, I'm originally from Philadelphia. Now I live in Florida.
Yeah.
So but I lived in near the Frederick, Maryland area for 25 years. So
Huh.
I kind of have all those places, and I have family in Atlanta. So I'm a
Yeah.
member of New Jersey, New York, Georgia, Florida, all the
Wow.
different postal history societies. And
Yeah.
I just wrote an article for the Florida Society. I don't know if you know Vern Morris. I mean, he's got a tremendous amount of
I know of
material, and
him.
he can't write up all the things he has. Well, he had an 1840. It was a letter from Fort Lauderdale. Before it was a city, it was just a fort, and there was an assistant surgeon that wrote a letter back to his sister and cousin in Annapolis. it's neat when you think about it. In 1840, there were only 7 post offices in all of Florida. So
Wow,
it
yeah.
had to go by steamship, part of the way. It was kind of complicated, but it was really fun for me to research
Oh,
that
yeah.
and get it. And I learned so much about the Seminole Wars. I'm from Philadelphia. They don't teach you about the Seminole Wars, right?
Yeah.
So, but where are you at in Maryland?
In Glen Arm, which is outside of Towson or periphery
Okay.
of Baltimore.
Sure. I spent a lot of time in Baltimore. I used to coach high school basketball, so I
Hmm,
was at a private school in Frederick, and we were all the time in Baltimore. And we played
cool.
my AAU. I coached girls, and my daughter got a full scholarship for basketball, so she was always playing
Wow.
every year, all year. I
God.
spent a lot of time in
Wow.
Baltimore. So, and
Yeah.
I was a member of the Baltimore Philatelic Society for a while, but that it just got to be too much with all she
Yeah.
was doing and trying to make meetings. But
So how do
it's
you,
neat.
for the Mid-Atlantic,
Mhm.
if you go to these Zoom meetings for the Philadelphia, for the Pennsylvania one, do you
Mhm.
get the same ones for the Mid-Atlantic? Because you run them?
Well, yes, I run both of them. So I have 2 lists. I have one list, for the PaPHS members, right? If we do something, but then I
Right.
have another list that I call Zoom, and pretty much everybody who has attended one of our Zoom meetings, I can download a spreadsheet with their name on it. So if I put Zoom, you should get an invitation to all of our, whether it's Pennsylvania or whether it's the Mid-Atlantic, you
Okay.
get an
Good.
invitation for those.
Yeah, I understand
That's
that.
why I do the registration part of it with Zoom. I require people to register. First of all, it keeps people out that might get goofy or whatever. But when you pre-register, then I know who's coming instead of just having a link where somebody can click and come in. I
Mhm.
know who was there, right? It'll give you a report. It'll say who registered, who actually attended. So I
Well,
get that list and I add it to my email list so that people know what's going on.
the
And we've
the
had some
one of the
great ones.
one of the one of the interesting, from my perspective, it would, when the COVID thing is gone and people
Oh,
go back to their normal meetings,
we're
I
we're
think there's going to be a big vacuum.
we're still doing this.
I mean,
I
it's
guarantee you that
incredible.
I will still be doing 1 a month for
I think they're cool.
Pennsylvania and 2 a month for the Mid-Atlantic Federation.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
can count on 3 a month from us. And Charlie has just blown it out with the Lancaster Society.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean,
He's great.
he gets 50 members for a regular weekly meeting.
Oh, yeah. I could.
That's
I went to
incredible.
last night. They did one last night.
Yeah, and when you're in a place like Maryland, I was there. We had a club in Hagerstown, and there was a club in Frederick, and I call them like the milk and cookies guys. Like if you didn't have milk and cookies there, these guys probably wouldn't have even shown up. But they weren't sure. And I'm not trying to be
And
judgmental
I
at
know what
all.
you
I
mean.
mean,
I
there's
mean,
a place for everybody
if
in
the
this
fire is
hobby.
burning in you,
But
you show up.
once you've been in the hobby for a while, you need to that whole thing about like if you're the smartest guy in the room, you're in the wrong room, right? I got to learn from these other guys that like tonight. This was fascinating for
Yeah,
me.
I'm not a stamp cover collector. I think
Hmm.
it's cool.
Right. Well, you can. We'll have stuff on everything, and seeing guys like Mark Schwartz here, Vern Mars. These are long ball hitters in the postal history world,
I
and
know.
we have these guys attending our meetings and on our boards, and we have their support for the things we're doing, and so I know we're going to be doing well.
Cool.
I'm
I'm
really
going to give a presentation at the Lancaster meeting in June, I think.
okay. Well, I'll be recording it just so you know. I
Oh,
work with Charlie and Paul. They long story, but I do video editing. I do websites. Even though it's not like my primary thing. I was an air traffic controller, right? So I've
oh,
been
wow.
retired for 13 years, but I do consulting work for that.
So you
But
see,
I still do I'm the technology guy, right?
yeah, wow.
So I edit the video from their meetings. Like, so if you do a presentation and then there's a show and tell and 1 or 2 people do mini presentations, I can break them all up into individual clips. All the stuff that
Oh, yeah.
Charlie's putting on YouTube right now,
Oh, yeah.
I do all his video
Oh,
editing for all
wow.
that. Yeah.
That's cool.
So,
Well, that's
yeah.
great. Well, I appreciate your help. Oh, one last question, and I'll let you
Sure, of
go.
course. Yeah.
I occasionally I see Charlie DeComo when he's busy at a meeting,
Mhm.
he'll go off camera and his picture pops up and it's still picture.
Right. And you want
I
to put a
have that
picture
problem every
there.
now and then too. How do I do that?
You know, I somehow have a picture also. Like right now, if I stop my video, that's a picture of where I live in Florida. I live on an intracoastal. I have no idea how that picture got there. I have to be honest with you. I do
Okay.
want to research that though,
You don't know how to
because
change. So what when you click off video that happens?
yeah. So there's the down at the bottom on the bar down the bottom where it says start video and mute, and so all I do is click on stop video, and it puts that picture there.
So when I hit stop video,
Yeah, your name comes up. It's all black and then your name in white.
so when I go to virtual background, I get video filters. Do you know anything about that? I don't want to
That's
take too much
I'm
time.
not sure. No, it's okay. I'm not in a rush or anything. So there's video.
I have a video filter and a virtual background. The virtual background is the stamp now.
Right.
And I'm trying to figure out if Charlie puts a picture of himself up there, I could pick this up, which is a partial picture of me, and I can improve on that. But I'm thinking,
Right.
I want to have just a picture so I can be in the background taking care of something else.
See, I have to learn how to do that, but I'll tell you what, if you'll shoot me an email, I just use skennedy@PaPHS.org. I'll put it in the chat there just so you have it. And I will find that out. I really
I'll
need
give
to
you a
do it.
to-do list, but if you
No,
want to find
no,
out anyway, I'd love it.
no. Hey, if I'm the technology guy, I'm supposed to learn how to. There's these little things that come up,
I
and
just want
that's
to be
like,
cool.
ah,
You know what I
geez.
mean?
Oh yeah, it's neat because, well, sometimes who knows? You might want to drink a water, and you don't want people seeing you drink
That's right.
the water or
Yeah.
whatever
Or
it might
milk and
be.
cookies.
Yeah, and one thing too, I'll give you a tip. You see my glasses where I don't have any reflection?
Yeah, mine are. It's always like
You,
clouded.
you know what I do is so if they're on correctly now, I lift them up in the back to tilt them down just perfect. There's no glare whatsoever in your glasses
Oh, right.
right
I
now.
like you.
It's just a tiny bit. And of course, I wear progressive bifocals, but I can still read. I can still do what I need to. You have zero glare in your glasses right now.
Cool. I like that.
And I don't know if you noticed that the lighting. I have overhead lighting. I have a ceiling fan, but then I have lighting on the side. The lighting on the side works much better than the overhead lighting.
Yeah.
So just little tips.
I know.
Yeah, it's fun.
That's what zooming's all about.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay. But
I
shoot me
appreciate it
an
very much.
email. I will figure that out, and I will get back to you. And make sure you're on our list for all our stuff that we're doing. And like I said, if you're ever interested in joining with us in Pennsylvania, there's a lot of crossover. Rick was talking about. I'm interested in Eli Beatty. I don't know if you're familiar with he's the cashier of the bank in Hagerstown. And there's tons of stuff out there, all different rates.
I'm a part-time dealer, and I get these stampless covers with him on there all the time, and I can't sell them because he's so common.
Absolutely, but let me know because I'm interested in that stuff, with especially with the odd rates. And it's interesting because I don't know how deeply you've gotten into this, but even from Williamsport, which is very close to Hagerstown, there's some really high rate stuff. Like they were sending, like some, triple rate stuff. And, so I'm just trying to put something together I know everybody knows about it, but it'd be kind of cool. Just like tonight, how Rick put together showed the different rates on cover from the different companies. That's kind of what I want to do. Just to do a half hour talk on it or something.
It's fun.
Yeah. So if you come across it, and also I'm interested in stuff around Frederick, like older stuff, stampless for sure, like Hagerstown, Williamsport, those kind of places, and Baltimore. I have some old Baltimore stuff that's really cool too.
Really?
I'll try and send you some images of it. I got stuff from Norm Shackett.
Yeah.
Probably more than 10 years ago. And it's Baltimore to Philadelphia stuff. And some of them are, I think, pretty good covers. So
It's cool.
I'll send you some images. You
All
let
right.
me know. You could probably, and I'm always open for buying, selling, trading. Looking. You have to move stuff to get more
I know.
interesting stuff.
I know.
So I'm happy
I
to
need
do that.
shows so I can get a cash flow again.
Yeah, and if you're interested, we have very low cost. Like our historian is going to be awesome with Martin Miller. He used to work for the APS and did some of the AP. But even like a business card, I don't even know what we charge, like $10 for a year. I mean, it's like a ridiculously low amount of money to advertise in our journal. And I can send you a copy of that too. You take a look, and
Okay.
if you have Pennsylvania stuff, you
Yeah, I
may
have to
have
look.
people that
Yeah.
are interested.
Yeah.
Okay, well that's
Cool.
cool. Shoot me an email. We'll stay in touch.
Hey,
Appreciate your
thank you very
time.
much. Appreciate you.
Okay, have a great night.
Yep.